I'd like to call to order the Village of Westmont Budget Workshop meeting on April 13th, 2023 at 4:30 p.m. and ask Clerk Simsky for a roll call, please.
Mayor Gunther?
Here.
The clerk's here. Trustee Barker?
Here.
Trustee Brady?
Here.
Trustee Guzzo? She'll be here.
Late.
She's running a little late. Trustee Little? Here. Trustee Nero?
Here.
Trustee Simonovich is absent. Manager May?
Here.
Assistant Manager Parker?
Here.
Finance Director Cunningham?
Here.
Would everybody please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone, to this meeting for our budget workshop for 2023-24. And before we begin our presentation, as always, we have an open forum. Anybody, I would imagine any questions will come during the budget presentation, so I'll close open forum, and then we'll turn it over to, I think, our Assistant Village Manager Parker to lead us in the beginning discussion.
Sure. So before I start, I do want to just start off with a quick thank you to those that devoted so much time and energy and effort to getting this budget in the place that it is. So first of all, of course, our new finance director, Jamie Cunningham, countless hours in doing analysis, working with departments, working on entries in our sheets, and getting everything to where we need to be and to help us be looking toward the future in a really good way. So huge kudos to her. As always, the departments did a fantastic job in preparing the budgets. They, even in this time of high inflation, they did a great job of making sure they held the costs where they could, made trimming cuts where they could, and only asked for things that were good and valuable things. As you'll see as we go through, we'll see all the different things that are coming in the budget. And I think that with these times of economic uncertainty and high inflation, what we've got in the budget's a really great thing, and that's a credit to the departments and their preparation and their hard work in getting there. It's also a credit to Village Manager May, who's the one who helped us get to where we are with it being a balanced budget that we're presenting to you, and who's really set the tone for how we look at the budget and how we try to make sure we're good stewards of public funds. And then finally, a thanks to all the elected officials for the tone that you set and the professionalism you push for in this process. We appreciate that. And also, of course, thank you in advance for listening to this whole presentation. So with that, I'm going to get started in terms of the overview and kind of what to expect. So we're going to do a very shortened version of Budget 101. We'll go through and hit the revenue and economic conditions. Jamie's going to be covering those, kind of looking for the economic conditions overall and talking through some of our key revenues. I'll cover the fund balances and where we're getting kind of by the end of this budget. And then as we get to the next two items by village board request, so the items that you guys had mentioned at the November meeting where we kind of said, what do we want to make sure gets included in this budget, as well as other items that are addressing priorities that the board's identified and things that we think are kind of highlights of the presentation for you to know. As we do that, Jamie and I will kind of tag team. Jamie will be taking the ones that are the bigger capital projects, and I'll be taking kind of the other priorities besides capital and infrastructure. And then we'll talk through some of the trimming that's already happened, and if during the course of the budget we get to where there's things that we want to add in, or we need to, if the board feels like they want to take a look at any cuts to make, we've also got some kind of starting points if you wanted to look at that, not cuts that we're recommending because we have them included in the budget, but items that you can consider if we want to when we get to that point. So I'll do a quick budgeting refresher. As the last slide mentioned, this was done in a lot more depth a couple of years ago. Typically when we have trustees that are changed, we have new trustees, we'll do a much more in-depth review of what funds are and how they work and all those. But since everybody's been through this a couple of times at least, some many times, I'll go really quick. So first of all, the budget is made up of several different funds. Each fund is a set of its own accounts and can be used for some specific purposes. So for example, someone might think, oh, well, instead of the flowers downtown, let's instead spend that money and hire a new police officer. And that doesn't work because those funds are built for specific purposes. So the flowers in the downtown come from our Convention Tourism Fund, which we can use to beautify our downtown to attract visitors, but can't use for other purposes. So the different funds that we talk through are different purposes, and because of that, they have different balances, and we expect them to do different things. One of the big differences between a couple of different funds and a key point, especially for our general fund, are the idea of recurring revenues versus one-times. And so what we try to do here at the village is pair any ongoing or recurring expenses, make sure they're covered by recurring revenues, and any one-time revenues or savings that we've accumulated only go towards one-time expenditures, so that we're not, in essence, it would be as if we were to think that we had to dip into our savings account just to make it through a standard month. And we don't want to do that. We want to make sure our income and our expenses match. And then we also have some fund balance targets, which we'll get to there, but that's sort of what we as a board have decided, and we tweak it each year if we need to at budget time. But what we think we want to keep in these funds, we have official policies, and then we have sort of our hopes beyond those policies of what we'd like to do in those funds. Each fund's a little different, so the funds have different target balances. So with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Jamie to kind of walk through our revenues and economic conditions. Unless there's questions before that.
Questions on what Spencer presented? Okay, so if you watched the news today, that kind of sets the tone for the year ahead. The news is saying that we are starting to enter a mild recession, and because of that, not only do we budget conservatively for revenues in the first place, but because of that, we did budget conservatively for the year ahead. Over the past couple of years, our revenue sources have grown, and sales tax, income tax, those definitely were looking very well. We do have a weakness in the stock market. There's a pullback in consumer demand, higher borrowing rates, and banking sector stress. So we're just going to be overly cautious when it comes to revenue. You'll see on the next slide that I'm going to show you the actual projections for sales tax and income tax, and you'll see that the actual is in the blue, the budget amount is in the red, and the green line shows the year-to-date revenues. So if you notice here, the projected amount for fiscal year end 2023, the projected year-end actual is slightly above what we're pegging for the budget for 2024. That's because we're not sure if the revenues will continue to increase at the rate that they increased this year. So let me explain a little bit about sales tax revenue. Just as a refresher, sales tax makes up about 33% of our general fund. It is the general fund, projected general fund revenue for fiscal year in 2025 is $35.5 million. And the fiscal year budget for sales tax is $11.82 million. For general merchandise, the current tax rate in Westmont is 7.5%, and 1% of this revenue goes to the village in the general fund, and 0.5% of the revenue goes to the stormwater infrastructure fund. Another point for sales tax is internet sales tax is about $500,000 or 4% of sales tax revenue. Grocery is $1.2 million, about 10%, and vehicles is $6.5 million, which is 55%. So we are very reliant on the sales tax revenue generated from car sales. And the year-to-date revenue shown here in the sales tax is the 8th month of revenue recognized for fiscal year 2023. That goes through December. Are there any questions on sales tax revenue? And I'm going to go to the next slide. This slide shows income tax revenue. The Village of Westmont receives a portion of state collected tax revenue through the Local Government Distributive Fund. We call it LGDF. Until 2011, 10% of the total income tax collection was dedicated to LGDF. to municipalities. And today, the local government share is 6.06%. There is legislation to get it back up to the 10%. Not sure if that's going to go through. The 10% was for over the next couple of years, not just for fiscal year 2024. So we get the estimated IDOR per capita amount, and that was 156 at the time when the revenue projections were created. IDOR did adjust their assumption down to 155.4 per capita, but we left it here. IDOR also said that they do expect this higher rate. If you notice from the past years, it has grown quite a bit. They said that because the state did not make the same tax changes as the federal tax changes that were made at the federal level, it actually increased the revenue for income tax at the state level. So that's a good thing for us. We are collecting a little more even at the 6.06%.
That LGDF, I mean, debates, mayors, managers, and the whole state is trying to debate with the governor to increase that. Last year, they gave us a little bit.
Just like a half a percent.
To increase the percent.
The percent, because the way it was, 10% is supposed to go to local governments, and they've been
Correct.
whittling it down to where it was 6, now it's 6.06. So we're hoping to get another, he promised us a little more. We'll see.
So as much as they can promise to give, they can also automatically take away. So this revenue has always been a somewhat unstable revenue. You hope that it goes up, and you also hope it doesn't go down. The places for eating tax revenue, this is collected locally. It's 2% on prepared food and beverages that have seating available within a business. So any business that has a seat that you can sit down and eat your meal, that they charge a places for eating tax. Overall, it's above pre-pandemic level, but we are being cautious with the signs of recession. Local Gov portal is now available for businesses to use and to make their payments on time, and it has been pretty successful. Utility tax, this one is showing the telecom portion of utility tax. Utility tax is made up of gas, electric, and telecom. Gas and electric are up very well over the past year because of the higher rates. And I assume for the next couple of years that we'll see those rates continue to increase because of the projected planned increases with ComEd and NICOR. The telecom, however, we are not projecting any differently than last year's budget because people, as they get rid of landlines, our revenues go down. And we cannot tax the data or text portion of a cell phone bill. And the hotel motel tax revenue. I'm projecting it up slightly from last year's budget, but I am not projecting it as much as what we project the year-end revenue to come in at, the actual year-end revenue for fiscal year in 2023. This tax is 5%, it's collected locally, and it must be spent on events that attract overnight stays. Again, just being cautious, overall theme, be cautious, see what this year entails. If we have to make revenue estimate changes based on how mild or how bad the recession could be, we will go back and we will report to the board any type of changes that are needed. Now Spencer is going to cover the fund balances. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Mary Gabriel. I know you get taxes from other sources, such as from gaming income and that. What category is that in, and what is your projection for that?
The gaming revenue goes into the, or video gaming, goes into the general fund, and we're holding that steady. Again,
What is steady?
I can give you,
You're looking for the annual amount that's collected?
Yeah, your estimate.
yes, ma'am, one
I was
second.
wondering like what line item in revenue that's,
It's about
500,000.
okay.
And that, the year-to-date actual revenue currently is 460,000.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Fiscal year to date.
Yes, fiscal year-to-date. Oh, can't wait till we can say
Yeah.
calendar year.
No, there's just a couple more weeks, so that number's on target.
And April probably hasn't come in, so it's a full month.
Any other questions about revenues? All right, I'm going to cover fund balance. Before we get into the stuff on the presentation, I do want to briefly kind of walk through this sheet of paper that you've got here in front of you, just so you can kind of understand it and you can use this to reference if you have any other questions. So this has a lot more details and a lot more numbers on it than we put on the slides, but I'll walk through the general fund and then kind of walk through the packet briefly in general. So this document, as you recall, is one we set up shortly after we started our new strategic plan with the different uses of our funds being tied to the components of the strategic plan. So along the top, the columns are the different funds. And on the first page in your packet, it's grouping some of the other funds together, like capital projects funds and specific purpose funds. So those are kind of groupings, which the future pages will explore out. But going down a column, so you can see in the general fund, we have an estimated beginning balance of about 7.1 million, and that's based on our 20% of what we want to keep in the general fund, so 20% of our operating expenses. We're going to see revenues of 33, almost 34 million in terms of revenues. We've got some transfers, both an operating transfer, those are the transfers that would kind of continue to happen in general, and then we also have the other transfers. Those other transfers are transfers that are like using of one time, so specifically transferring out money from our long-range plan fund to be able to cover any one-time expenditures or carryovers that we need. Then you see the uses of funds, and we've broken those down by categories. I will point out just kind of briefly what they cover. You can see the words from our strategic plan. The governance, in terms of kind of some of what's actually showing up in the budget, the governance are the things that it takes to get the job done. So it includes a lot of administrative sort of expenses. It also includes the facilities and equipment that we need. The identity and image includes two fairly different components, but they're all kind of lumped in together under the strategic plan. So one piece of that's pretty obvious is the ones about marketing our town, something that makes our town look, aesthetically pleasing. Those sort of things are covered under identity and image. In addition, one of the parts that the strategic plan talked about, our identity as Westmont, includes being a safe place. And so with that, we have a large majority of that, almost 19 million in our general fund, that is actually public safety expenditure. So for both police and fire, the vast majority of their budgets are all part of that, making us have a safe community and, focusing in on that part of our identity. The downtown is pretty self-explanatory, as is economic development. I will say in terms of operating departments, community development largely is coming out of economic development. And then we have our infrastructure accounts, which will include both, infrastructure accounts, which include both things like roads and sewers and alleys, as well as our water fund is entirely in the infrastructure fund. So if you add all those up together, the total uses in the general fund comes out to about 35.5 million. So that's our revenues are exceeding our uses or expenses by about $5,000, leaving us with an ending balance of $7,113,000. And you can see our recommended balance is the 20% that we started out with. So we're 5,000 better than our recommended balance. I do want to highlight that next fund that's on that list called Long Range Plan Fund. In the past, that was one that we were trying to differentiate from our reserves we kept in the general fund, and we referred to it as our excess fund balance fund. And I will say our new finance director pointed out that people might take the word excess the wrong way and make it sound like it's money that isn't actually needed, and highlighted that, what are we actually using it for? And we explained, it's for all this long-range planning things we have to accomplish and get done. Our capital things in the future, all these future needs. And so
Don't call it that.
at her suggestion, we are calling it the Long-Range Plan Fund, and I think that makes a lot of good sense. You can see the totals for capital, and then you can see the different funds listed here. The sheets that I'm going to show up at the top are going to focus more on what the fund balance is, so kind of the ending fund balance line is going to be a major focus. Some of them will show the targets as well.
Spencer, on the
Yeah.
general fund with the 35 million plus, it's the conservative revenue. No,
It is the conservative revenue that
And-
Jamie talked about, and then we also try to be conservative. So in general, we try to underestimate the revenues we're going to get and hopefully overestimate the expenses, though with inflation, you never know. And then ideally, what happens at the end of the year is we ended up bringing in a little more money than we thought, spending a little less than we thought, and we have a little bit more that we can put into our savings, which is in essence our long-range plan.
so these figures include,
So they include trying to be conservative. I will say we're being a little bit, in some ways, perhaps a little bit less conservative than we've been in the past, because we've realized sometimes we're putting aside too much into savings, and if you're doing that, then there's some ongoing things that we're not able to get done because we thought we couldn't do them. So we're maybe trying to be a little bit less conservative. Mayor, I know in the past you've kind of said we've been maybe a little too conservative. So we're trying to be a little bit less conservative, a little bit closer to realistic, but I think we're still in a good conservative.
and these figures don't include when you do the actual budget, you increase the expenses a little extra, don't you?
When we do the appropriations ordinance, which is the legal spending document, we do increase the amounts just in case there's more that come up that aren't budgeted. So we work on this plan, which is the closer to realistic, what we really think expenditures will be, and we focus on this plan that you're seeing tonight. Before the end of the first quarter of the fiscal year, we do have to do an official legal version of how much we can spend without coming back and asking you for more permission. But this is the document that we use on a practical basis.
5 million could be 40 million because you increased the line items, right?
Yeah, and probably will be, because we'll be saying, what if
Yeah.
this happens? What if that happens? But we don't want to build in too many what ifs right now if we're looking at actual realistic expectations of revenue, or we wouldn't do anything if we built all the what ifs in here. Yep. So the slide talks about how we come up with these different fund targets. So in general, for operating funds, we try to get 20% of what we bring in each year. In the capital funds, we want to have sitting there about 100% of what the annual revenue is. We don't usually bring in a lot. It's mostly built up from, prior reserves, or, as I talked about, kind of coming in under budget. And then some of the specific ones have their own targets for specific reasons. And then our long-range plan, we have roughly 3 million built into there for what we want to keep as our balance, and that's for some of the contingencies that we've talked about in the past. So kind of having a little bit of an additional cushion on top of our 20%. So looking at the general fund, you can see the beginning balance, the revenues, and the ending, and those all tie out, and they're meant to tie out so that we have the balanced budget in our operating general fund. So I've already gone through that in a lot of detail on the chart. This one shows beginning and ending revenues and expenditures in convention and tourism. And we'll cover more details when we get kind of down to the next section of kind of highlights in the budget. But you can see over here the expenses, the green expenses are just a tiny bit over revenues. So we are looking at drawing down that fund balance just a little bit. You can see in this fund, we are well over 20% of the expenditures. We're, maybe twice over what we spend each year sitting in our convention tourism. So that's drawing down a little bit each year, and that's understood and sort of expected. Our IMRF fund, we also have expenditures exceeding revenues a little bit to draw down that balance. As you'll recall, in the past, the balance had gotten a little bit high. It was getting, closer to a typical annual amount, and so we've been drawing that down steadily to get closer to that 20%. We're getting a little closer, so what that probably means is that next year, when we start doing the property taxes for our IMRF and Social Security Fund, we may have to put more of our limit in there and a little bit less in the general fund. So we might have to be tightening our belts on property taxes in the general fund a little bit next year, but we're okay for this year.
Spencer, what percent are we at as far as our funding level? Do you know? Are we at 55, 60% of what?
I have
Oh, at
that
IMRF?
information.
I'm not
We
quite sure.
are-
Do you know, Jamie? I'm going to say it's
I
7.
have it right here.
Great.
The IMRF is 74.89% funded,
That's,
and the police pension fund is 56% funded, and the fire is 213% funded.
wow, way to go, chief. All right.
Yeah, with the
Because
fire.
there are,
No retirees.
no retirees and not many members.
I bring that up because all the state is under 50%, most of the places.
Correct.
Unions and teachers' union stuff is, so our IMRF is very,
It
Been
is.
aggressive with it too over the years.
Yep.
I'd
So
say
good.
that's more, do you think, Jamie, than all the surrounding communities? I feel like they're a lot less.
Oh, that's a good
Not all the
percentage.
surrounding communities, but several of them. I think we're right in line with most of them in the DuPage area.
thanks, Vince.
Yeah. Our South Westmont Business District TIF, so you can see we have a negative beginning balance, because as you'll recall, in order to get the Amazon Fresh going there, the village had to loan money to the TIF, and loaned a couple $1 million to help with some purchase of land to get that project going. And then over the course of the years, the TIF is earning some money, and you can see they're earning more than the expenses. And so they're able to be paying the village back. So we're going to go from where there's a net deficit of almost, is that close to 600,000 or so, and it'll be close to about 250,000. So probably in a couple of years, that TIF might have as much cash as they owe the village. And so it's kind of catching up. Our next TIF, the CBD TIF, is about to start going sort of the opposite direction for right now. So they currently still owe about $2.5 million or the amount they have in the bank is about $2.5 million less than what they owe to the village. We've got budgeted in the CBD TIF, some big one-time expenditures largely related to the One North Cass property. So we're finishing off a little bit of parking lot expenses, tiny bit of that, and then moving the roads and all those things that we had talked about doing for the One North Cass project. We've got budgeted here. And so those are the expenses that we've got coming in, and really these one-time revenues that are coming in. When we do these expenses, it looks right here, it's kind of coming even about the 2.5 million still, but what will really happen is this amount here, this 3 or 4 million, is going to be tacked on to the ending balance here, and so they'll really end up owing us a significant amount. So let's see, so we're transferring in about almost 4 million, so they'll end up owing almost 7 million or so, $6 to $7 million that the TIF will owe the village, and maybe that'll be paid off in the future.
But that amount is, the school district still gets their money, that's not part of that, so they're getting their percent.
Yeah, it's not part of the school district getting their percent, so part of this expense is the school district.
So that's part of the
Getting their
expense too.
expenses.
And what about does this reflect the property we've bought recently? As far as expenses?
In terms of the payment, I think that it does, I think we put that in there, but,
The 1 point?
Yes.
Yeah, 1 point, yeah, okay, good.
yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask for just some clarification on the CBD TIF? We had already received the money when we got the financing of 2.5 million or something at one time? Or where's the original, money coming from that we're spending? And like, I know you approved at the March meeting, like roughly 1.8 million to purchase the parcels to combine One North Cass. So I'd just like to understand that a little better.
Yeah, so the TIF is basically, the way the TIF gets money is, as the property values in the district go up, the property taxes on that increased value goes into the TIF fund. And so the TIF then could spend this money to do things. Well, one of the challenges is, until you do stuff in the TIF, the property taxes don't raise very much. And so to help jumpstart things, sometimes you have to spend money that isn't there in the TIF. And so what the village has done over the last several years is say, the village is going to loan money to the TIF, so the TIF can jumpstart some of these projects. And so I think probably part of the reason that this thing is down to that 2.5 million is, especially if it includes the purchase of the properties that we just did, the village had the money in, our long-range plan fund, transfers that money over to the TIF, and then the TIF uses that money to start progress and make projects happen in the TIF. And then the hope is those projects generate enough additional property tax values that eventually the TIF pays it back, like we're seeing happening on the south one.
So that's part of this $10.4 million transfer out of the long-term plan fund.
Yeah, that's about, yeah. So about 3 million or so of that is going to this TIF, 3 to 4 million.
Thank you for the
3.8 million.
clarification.
When the TIF starts, there's zero money in it. I mean,
Right.
it has to accumulate with the growth. And we haven't yet seen the whole amount for the new development here on the corner. So that's going to be increased. That'll add to the coffers, so to speak.
Yes. Yep, so we'll start getting money probably maybe a little bit this year, but then I think especially starting next year, starting to see some money coming into that. At the same time, we'll also have expenditures for that because the first couple of years, we're paying almost all of the revenue, if not more, that we generate from that, we're giving back to the developer because that's what it took to make the project happen. So we'll start getting in this revenue, but we'll also have increasing expenses. All right, the next one just kind of lumps several funds together for special purpose balances. So our VRP, our downtown parking, you'll notice doesn't have any lines because as we talked about at the last meeting, we're moving those together and taking the money that was in the downtown parking because with the amount of money that we've already spent with the building out the north parking lot and the money we're doing to improve kind of the parking area around Quincy and those kind of things, if we treated the downtown parking like we're doing with the TIF, where we say the village is just loaning this fund money to do this parking stuff, I think we saw it was going to take like several hundred years to pay it back, and it just kind of became, doesn't make a lot of sense to keep that fund there for several hundred years just to pay it back, so it's easier just to roll it all in and say, all the expenses for parking, the $30,000 that this downtown parking fund had is just rolled into the general fund. So we've done that in this budget, and you can see kind of where we are with our ending versus our targets, and we're in pretty good shape. I will say debt was a little bit better than the target. And I think all along we see we're doing a little bit better than what our targets were. So we're in good shape for special purpose balances. Capital projects balances, we're doing okay. And the reason that we're doing okay in the capital fund, as we see as we'll get into the infrastructure, is we've got a lot of capital projects going. But the reason we're able to do that is that we're transferring money again from the long-range planning fund into our capital projects fund. And specifically looking at our capital projects fund, we've got about $5 million or so coming into our capital projects funds in terms of transfers. And I think most of that's from the long-range plan fund. So the reason that capital ends up coming out at right at the target is not a coincidence. That's how much we transferred in there to make it come out. You can see stormwater infrastructure we've got saved up. We've got another slide coming very soon with a little bit more detail on the stormwater infrastructure. And you can see the motor fuel tax and motor fuel rebuild Illinois. There's no target on the rebuild Illinois because we have to spend it within the next year or two. And so next couple of years maybe. And so we don't need to keep a balance in there at all. On the water fund, you can see our expenditures here. You can also see we're pulling down our fund balance in the water fund, and you can see it's getting a little bit low. And I will say there'll be a brief mention here and then probably later, more discussion a little bit later about water rates and how do we make sure we're tracking where we need to be for those kind of things. Because as you can see, if we draw down our balance again by the similar amount we're doing this year, we're not going to have a balance left after the next few years if we keep drawing it like that and nothing else changes. So we'll talk through some of those pieces, but you can see we've got a little bit of a balance left.
So,
It's not sustainable long-term.
As a reminder, did have rate adjustments program that you all agreed to forestall or postpone for a kind of pandemic relief, and those have never been, instituted. But when that same thought, but we are where we are today and doing that, so at the next Administration Finance Committee, we'll talk about the need of just a formal water rate study next week.
Spencer, the 20% comes about 1.5 to 2 million we need in that fund for our to reach on our goal.
Yeah, I think that would be kind of about where we're,
20% of expenses, right?
Yeah.
It's already
Yeah.
$1 million. All right.
yeah.
So we're still there, but it's going to eat it away
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah, we're okay this year. It's not a good sustainable long-term situation. So we'll need to take steps to address it in the future, but we're okay for this year. And then you can see overall our total targets, the ending balance, and then how we're over the target of what our ending balances are when you add up all of them together. So overall, we're in good shape. Our long-range plan fund, so I will say on this one, the first blue section, the first 20% is actually technically the balance that's in the general fund. So that's the 20% of our operating expenditures. We then build that contingency that we talked about in the long-range plan. We're transferring about $10 million from the long-range plan out to other funds. Vast majority of that is capital and the TIF. We've got a little bit coming into the general fund just to cover some one-time expenditures that we'll go over, as well as some carryover items. And then at the end of this budget, if everything goes exactly as planned, which we know it won't, but if it did, we would have about $8 million left in our long-range plan fund to be able to do some projects in the future years.
But if we don't use the contingency, it could grow.
Yeah. Yep. All right, so any questions on any of those fund balance pieces before we jump onto the highlights of the budget? All right, moving on to the highlights of the budget. We've broken these down as we have in past years by our different priorities. So over on the right-hand side, the column is the list of everything that was in our strategic plan. So those are the vision components. Those are the ones that are on the sheet in front of you, the breakdown of all those pieces. We then had a workshop with the village board several years ago where we said, what are our shorter term priorities? What are we looking at right now? And then each year at the budget process, we kind of relook at those and see, are those still our key priorities? And they typically have been. So those priorities are this horizontal group. So community safety, safe routes to school, as well as downtown economic development and infrastructure. So those three that are purple are both a short-term priority and a long-term strategic plan priority. And so those are how we break down these priorities. And as we go through the different highlights and different sections in the budget, we note at the bottom which of these key priorities these items on each slide kind of tie to. So the first section I want to go through are things that were specifically requested by the village board. So as you'll recall, back in November, at the kind of the beginning of this process, we start out by saying, what are the things that the board wants to make sure get included in the budget? What are things we want to look at and focus on as we go into the budget? And so we're going to start by highlighting those items. And then after that, we'll go into some of the other highlights that are things that, you know, have been expressed at prior times that are important to the board, or things that just seem like good highlights to mention. So the first item on the list I want to cover is downtown. So one of the things that was requested was to make sure the budget included money to replace the tree lights with some LED things. We have $30,000 that cover year-round tree lights. And in talking with Public Works, that cost is going to be covering the LED bulbs. So that has been included in the budget. There was also a request to make sure the budget includes some money for performances at Addington Plaza. We have talked in the past about like a busking sort of initiative, and things sort of morphed into a performance type of initiative. So we have money in the budget for that. I'm not sure in terms of timing if it's going to end up happening this year or not, but we have it in the budget in case there is the ability for that. My kind of thoughts on that timing are twofold. Number one, you know, staff time, if we have time to set up a new program, or if we need to kind of finish off kind of some of the programs we're doing right now. So that, excuse me, that might be delayed slightly. And then the other piece we'll have to time that out with is this Quincy streetscape. If we're doing major construction, we want to make sure all that aligns in a good way. So we have it in the budget.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what it'll look like, but
That's
it's
a
at
good
least there.
comment for a lot of things. So they're in the budget so that they can be accommodated, but it doesn't mean that on May 1st, we start doing everything that's approved in the budget.
But would that, that amount of money could either be appropriated and used by Westmont first, or given to special events if they're coordinating it to provide the performances?
Sure, however, whoever's coordinating or however the performances are coordinated, the money could just go to that, yeah. It could go to the performers, it could go to another entity that's coordinating that if they needed to use that to perform, to pay for it, sure. So we've also got,
Question, can you tell me what the bulk of the 2.9 million for One North Cast expense
Tell you exactly whatever.
Yeah, so I will say in general, the big pieces of that are the moving the road and moving the ComEd line. So we have a road that goes right through where the building needs to be. We also have a ComEd line that goes right through where the building needs to be. So both of those need to be moved. Together, the cost is pretty close to that 3 million. There's a handful of other small little expenses, but those are the big pieces.
Will the existing buildings need to be demolished to do this work you're talking about?
Yep,
And where are the demolition costs for that?
all in the same with the TIF. Yep, all in that same area. Yeah, so that's a part of that. I mean, it's small compared to the major infrastructure pieces, but it's all part of that same piece.
And
This
Spencer,
is being recorded for YouTube and future reference, so we'll
Yep.
either repeat the questions
Oh,
or
sorry.
or
Oh, I'm
ask
Yeah,
her to come
you're
up.
right, sorry.
We've got that one covered, but we'll,
the 2.9, what Mary's talking about, that's the expenses for this upcoming
Yes.
fiscal year. So the expenses we've already incurred during this fiscal year are not included in that, including purchase of that property at 1.8.
Right. It's just the future purchases for the One North.
And that
campus.
is the ComEd line and the road. They'll be the big ones, yeah.
Yep. Any other questions on the downtown pieces? All right, we'll get to sidewalks, and so I'll let Jamie kind of take over this piece for the capital side of things.
All right, for sidewalks, these are some costs. We're going to get into the projects a little later, but the sidewalk, we have 75,000 for engineering. If we get the grant for specific sidewalks. 50,000 sidewalk cutting, 60,000 59th Street sidewalk Phase 1 design, 150,000 for construction engineering if we need it. So the board asked for an update on Adams sidewalk during when we asked what strategic questions were discussed. So we have bids received on 4/11, which was just the other day, and it was included in the bid for 65th Street and South Wilmette. This will come to the board on April 20th, and construction should begin in May
On all three areas?
on all three areas. Okay. So Adams Street, just in case you want to know, is the east side, 55th Place to Diane Park. 57th Street is the north side, Adams Street to Park Street. Lindley Road is east side, 55th Street to 57th Place. South Wilmette is from Quincy to 55th, and 65th Street is the north and south side, Fairview Avenue to Schramm Drive. So are there any questions on Adams?
we'll have to make sure we bring those locations in next week when we do the award too, because the mayor was asking about it earlier today.
Do we notify the residents that sidewalk's going to go in their parkway?
Well, I mean, first you have to award the
After
contract,
we
so that's
award
published, and then when it's awarded, then we have a pre-construction meeting, then when we've got the details of when things will progress, they'll get directly notified, but there's no outreach aside from that,
Until we approve it, yeah.
yeah.
All right, next, we're moving on to stormwater. So since its inception in 2016, we have collected $12,389,839 in revenues. We have so far expended $6,727,801. And at the end of fiscal year in 2024, we're projecting a fund balance of $2.9 million. That's because we have several projects scheduled for fiscal year ending 2024. This, first, before we get into the projects, we're going to go into the ongoing costs. We have debt payment currently of $480,000, $100,000 for sewer lining, $30,000 for sewer jetting, $30,000 for ditch grading, $20,000 for year yard design, $15,000 for pervious paver cleaning, and $25,000 for a GIS update. Here are the past stormwater projects that have been completed. I'll let you take a minute to see those.
Is there a way, and I can do this, and I think I asked for this. I'm happy not to be coughing right now. To tie this back to our original stormwater study, you know how it had all those priorities, I had it the other day, and I think there were like 55 different things on there. And, they had that great study, everything the whole town was looked at in 2014 or whatever it was. But they were all ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm assuming that we covered the first 15. But again, we've learned those 15 are important, but then it's also based on opportunity. So we're still looking at that original map. Or are we just?
Yes,
working on opportunity?
I guess the answer is yes, but just appearing on the map or the survey doesn't necessarily mean it's a public project either. So in some of the cases, so you had certain areas that just responded in greater force, so there were a lot of issues in one subdivision. So we did a lot of storm sewer extensions to bring the stormwater sewer to a place where it's accessible so that people could help themselves, on private property. So the bigger public ones, we're definitely follow that, and that'd be a good exercise to do, is to pull that back out and actually cross-reference which ones were done in what year.
We don't want to miss any that are
Oh, sure.
really important. But then I also felt when that was done, there were some things on there that I would never spend money on. Even, there was like a $35 million one over there, and I'm just like, yeah, that'd be.
It's still there. Yeah. So
It's-
there's an issue there, but it's,
Right, so. and
Is
we
it
know-
solvable?
We know that, and there's, other ones that become priorities, and I understand the opportunity and how that happens, but I don't want to miss something that is important, and it still comes down, from my time sitting here. No matter what we say about stormwater, nobody believes the engineers. They got water in their house.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the numbers are, I got water in my house, and it's because you mowed your parkway. Or you have a downspout aimed at my house now, and it wasn't there before. You get all those things, but I just want to make sure that we've covered that work with our spending. So, but thank you.
So the 2023 projects, not all of them have been finished yet, so we did carry over funding from the 2023 projects into 2024. But here are the projects that were started. 61st and Cumner, there's still some plantings left to do. 61st in Richmond, Traube design, 57th Cass Adams design, and we have CBD Alleys DGHN 1S. So the stormwater projects on the next slide, there we go, that are budgeted for fiscal year end 2024 is the construction for Traube Avenue, the residential alleys 1S, Lincoln and Grant, residential alley 12 north, or 12N,
12 north.
12 north.
It's north and south.
I figured that. Williams Park, 57th Cass Adams, CBD Alley, Section H, and 61st and Cumner. So future projects include Richmond and Grant, Linden and North Polk, Oakmont, Lake Charles Outfall, and residential alleys.
And Richmond and Grant could be a very large project, probably, if we.
Well, that's what we was referencing before. It's
There's
Leave
two.
it.
the repair is worth tenfold what the properties are worth,
Did we pick these two residential alleys because they're in the worst shape? Lincoln, Grant, Williams, and Park?
It's, in some cases, yes, as far as need, but it's also the central business district alleys where the brick paver, when we get into the residential, they're not all gonna be brick pavers. So we're kind of radiating from the center of town out, and unless there's a strong need to go hit something out of order.
You know that question's gonna come. When's
Yeah.
mine?
Yes, definitely,
I think it was
which is why I don't like lists.
I know you don't.
a month ago, I don't know who answered the question, but, we felt like we were keeping up on the roads, keeping up on the roads and the alleys and all that, and that's great. So we're not behind the eight ball like we were a long time ago.
All right, moving on to other priorities, I'm going to throw it back to Spencer.
All right, so one of the key priorities that we've talked about in the past, and I know it's been mentioned, is the importance of recruitment and retention. So we've got on here a list of several different things. The top several items that are listed here are focused on the fire department, and so we have the paramedic contract increase, and then the next couple, we have the fire service stipend. That was something that was mentioned at last year when we were kind of coming up with lots of different ideas to try to make sure we could recruit and retain people in our fire department. So we have that in there. We have a fire department analysis that we'd like to do to kind of take a look at some potential futures for the fire department and kind of what do those costs look like under different scenarios. And we also have, then kind of it moves into the broader items. So both the education incentive and the paramedic training are listed on that line for $115,000. The education incentive includes firefighters, but also general village employees for the continuing education. And we've talked about that at, I think, a fairly recent board meeting where the official policy for that was approved. We added $30,000 for external recruitment. We've got a general wage adjustment amount of about $641,000 that's listed there. That represents a 4% increase and is consistent with, I think, kind of what we're seeing other communities and especially other police departments doing in that area. We also have $700,000 set aside as a contingency, and this is specifically, as you know, we've started working on our compensation study, and one of the things we wanted to make sure didn't happen was we ended up with a compensation study that says, oh, here's how much you ought to be paying people, and we can't pay them anything like that, and then all the employees say, oh, you're underpaying me, and then that has the opposite effect of recruitment. So before we started doing the compensation study, we made sure that we had enough money. If it does require some additional pay to be competitive with the market, we've got money set aside for that. Hopefully, we are going to be, not needing to use that or not need to use all of it, and that'd be wonderful, but we have it there in case we do, just because we didn't want to start looking like we were committing to something that we couldn't fund. So we've got that money listed there. Any questions on recruitment and retention?
Spencer, on the growth, the GWA gross wage adjustment, 4% is even under what the cost of living in the CPI has been. So it's not like we're matching it.
Yes, that's true. So if we look at the last couple of years with inflation and we say, okay, what is it this year and what was it last year to kind of see back to the last 2 years, I think looking at this, we're seeing that the inflation itself is roughly 12% and the employees' general wage adjustments are closer to like 6%. So, yeah,
But
to your point,
4%
it's-
is consistent with most of the surrounding communities, like you said.
Yeah, and in general, when we're looking at what we want to do for increases, you want to kind of look at what the market's doing, not just look at CPI, or otherwise everybody's salaries should be bouncing around up and down like CPI does. So CPI over time is fairly consistent, and that makes sense to do these kind of increases consistently, even though sometimes they'll be over CPI as they have been in the past. Sometimes they'll be a little bit under CPI.
A question with the fire department analysis, is that going to be more for staffing or exactly what is?
Yeah, so we've done some analyses about kind of what are some possibilities for the future? What would it look like if we did go full-time? And I will say, I don't think at this point anybody wants to move in that direction. We're hoping we don't have to for, hundreds of years. That'd be wonderful. I don't know if that's quite realistic to be hundreds of years, but we could always hope. But what we have known is, we've seen these trends that might be pushing more and more that might be our only option. And so we've done some, as you know, we've done some internal analysis to say, what do we think it would cost? And so the next step is to kind of say, okay, we figured out what we think it costs. What do experts who do this a little bit more often than we do, what are all the pieces that none of us internally have thought about? And what would it really cost to keep the same level of service? And then when we see how much that is, then, what I think would be a useful thing to do is to say, okay, on the other side of things, what happens to our level of service if we say we can only afford the same amount of money? And what does that do to the level of service? And then we've got some decisions to make about moving, if we are going to move in that direction. What I think is one of the benefits to this is being able to say, what do things look like on either of those two extremes? Because we have a lot of things that come up where we say, we'd like to do this with our fire department, but we really don't know what that impact will be for the future. So we've got some facilities improvements that would be really, really good to do. But if all the future possibilities are, we stay in this facility, we need this facility for what it's going to do, and in fact, it needs to be improved, then that's really easy, and we say, great, we know we should spend the money on it. If in fact it says, oh, well, we might need a much bigger facility that would look a lot different, or we might need to do some other things where we wouldn't need this improvement, then that gives us some more information about what improvements we would be wanting to do, so we're not going to make an improvement that will end up being a waste of money a couple of years down the road. Same thing for if we're looking at increasing staffing or manning, we want to be able to take a look at what does that look like. So one of the things you'll see in another couple of slides is, there was some thought that it would be wise or could be nice to add an extra person on the shift. And what we're saying is that's a great idea, but let's take a look and see under these different scenarios, what does that look like in the future before we make any commitments right now? So that's kind of what we're looking for in this analysis, from my perspective, is trying to say, what are some future possibilities? How does that influence decisions we make today?
Thank you.
When we do that, can we go out for RFP for something like that? I would just be curious to see who these professionals are and what they're actually going to do that we can't,
Sure.
Just kind of, it might help you realize,
Yeah.
oh shit, I could just look at this instead, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, we can do some requests for proposals, requests for qualifications, kind of check what their, expertise are and the costs are and those kind of things.
I'm glad we're able to do that general wage adjustment. I think everybody knows everything costs more, and a lot of employees making under a certain amount are affected more. So it's great that we're able to hopefully support that. It's nice.
Thank you.
I think it's great to, keep this system intact. It's a lot of hard work there. And, we heard over the last few years about certain people in the department having to go above and beyond all the time. And I'm hopefully in the conversations, we're correcting that somehow. So it's a little bit, I don't know, I couldn't pick out a person that doesn't go above and beyond. But it shouldn't be the everyday occurrence. That should be occasional, not the rule. So if, I like this, I appreciate all that. And if we're staying, in the part-time department scenario, then we have to make sure that we have the staff, where you guys agree we have the staff so that it all works out. Because you don't want all the good people, call them all good people, but you don't want everybody always at this level when that's an exception. It's supposed to be. So,
Yes. Chief, I know you could speak to this a little bit more, but my understanding is our ranks are getting a little bit more full. We've got more staffing, and you and the deputy chiefs aren't forced to spend every single waking hour, and others.
But the summer's coming, so.
But the summer's coming.
Yeah, we have, Deputy Chief O'Hare's new vision has really led us to where we are fully staffed right now, but, we're always usually like that through the winter time, but as the mayor said last week, you guys are seeing it up and down Cass Avenue. We're just nonstop lately, which is great. It's busy, but it's nothing that we can't handle. But currently today, we're good, but let's see what the summer months hold. As we know, we just did the schedule for the first 2 weeks in May, and we had about 42 openings. Now, a lot of those do fill up, but the manager will see my timesheet. I'm coming Sunday, and then next weekend, the battalions need to start taking their vacation days. My deputies are on both off right now together, so, we'll see what the summer brings, but we are very happy and successful where we are today with our staffing level.
They're off together, they go to vacation together?
One's in Peoria at an EMS Chiefs Conference, and the other one is at the National Fire Academy in Maryland.
So there's no planned staff increase or need, right?
Well, I shouldn't say that. So in the budget, I requested a fourth on the truck.
Did you?
I think Assistant Manager Parker said we're going to hold on to it now, see what the analysis does.
Yeah.
And then we'll revisit it, I'm assuming. May not happen this year. I've talked to the Assistant Village Manager the other day, and I understand where everybody's coming from. Obviously, I would like that, but, I'm certainly not going to say I have to have it. I mean, I agree with what's going on with the budget.
All right, good.
Has other departments restricted part-time jobs anymore? That I know Lamont.
Yeah, it still continues on, Mayor, of departments. Downers Grove is honestly looking at it right now. I have one female that works for me, that she's on probation over there, and they may restrict it. Their union president is heavily involved with the IAFF, and he is trying to push no secondary employment, so it's continuing to transition that way. We'll see what happens, but right now, we're very young. We showed in our year-end report that we're very young, but now we just need to get these young kids educated in school to be paramedics and continuing to serve the residents the best possible way.
I would assume if we had to do something on an emergency basis, we could do it.
Yeah.
It's just not in the budget.
Yeah, if there was an emergency and we needed to do the sort of thing, we could.
We are short 2 members on our contract, and we currently have 2 that are not firefighters that graduate actually tomorrow from the Romeo Fire Academy, but we are short 2, so the contracts are still seeing the struggle to get me firefighter paramedics. I've accepted to allow them just to have single role paramedics for that 2.5 months that they go to school. But again, the contracts are still short to provide us, so a lot of my staff is working overtime. And if not, then the part-time paramedics have to ride the ambulance, and then we get a reimbursement off of the Metro paramedic contract.
Chief, just top of your head, how many of the people that are part-time firefighters are working in another as a full-time firefighter?
Years ago, it used to be about 80-20, now it's 20-80.
Okay.
So I have about only 20% working for full-time organization.
Thank you.
And then 9 in the city of Chicago, but I don't really count them because they're not part of the IFF, and they have a whole separate set of rules in the city of Chicago than the suburbs have.
But ties into Spencer's earlier comments about wishing we could be able to do this a long time, but for reasons that are not in our control, we have to be prepared to look at things differently. Be ready for it. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you.
All right, the next area of priorities that I wanted to highlight are environmental areas. So as you know, we recently did the approval for the Pasquinelli drive light replacement and the change order for the $45,000 to include some dark sky features. We've got LED replacements at Village Hall. There's a request from the EIC to include a dark sky rebate program for $5,000. That's in the budget. We've got ongoing money for recycling events if they're needed, and then also some money that the Environmental Improvement Committee donates to other environmental causes. So any questions? And I will say on all of these slides obviously don't encapsulate every single thing that's happening on any different level, right? Because if we did, these slides would be a lot longer and we'd be having 4 or 5 budget workshops as we used to do in the past. So we're trying to cover the highlights and just sort of give you kind of a taste of some of these things. So any questions on environmental pieces? All right. Also wanted to cover some of the other identity and images, the aesthetics things. So landscaping we've got going on. We've got some in some other places. So North Park, we've got some money set aside to start designing a railroad right-of-way landscaping. So kind of along the railroad tracks, getting some landscaping there. Jamestown Detention Basin, and then some money towards improving some landscaping around public buildings. We've also got a lot of tree items, and so each year we make sure we kind of highlight the trees and what we're spending on trees to continue to support that aspect of the village, both in terms of the pruning as well as the planting. I will say the pruning is one that I think a couple of years ago, we started saying we need to be pruning a little bit more frequently, and I think this 160,000 is getting us to where we are hopeful that we'll be able to get the village pruned kind of once every 5 years. So prune the whole village within 5 years, so then it could kind of start over, because they'll need more after that. So that's sort of the trees. So anything on landscaping, trees, any of those before we move on? Okay. We have other items for community safety, and so we've got some items that are listed here: the Lucas device, cardiac monitors, updating some cellular modems for public safety, some bunker gear, and then some items that the police are doing through a grant program that they received. We also have money in community development for some of their specific plans. We've got a comprehensive plan, a downtown sub-plan needed, and then finishing off our zoning ordinance rewrite are also included in that budget. We've got some facilities items, including some upgrades to the police and fire buildings. A big chunk of that is the restroom and locker room upgrades that I believe the board just approved awarding recently. We've got, or approved the purchase orders for as well. We've got an HVAC replacement, and then some money to do a needs assessment for 39 East Burlington to make sure we're using that kind of in the best way possible. That's the old water building, especially the portion that is not currently used for the plant, and it's kind of been, the offices that used to be in there are now in the public works facility, so kind of looking at some options for that building. Other items that wanted to at least mention in terms of governance, we've got about $130,000 increase in the budget for ongoing items that will deal specifically with safety services, some training and some software. We've got $50,000 for entity-wide planning, and that will probably start with a strategic plan sort of item. We also have some additional money in there for marketing and branding if we get to that after the entity-wide planning. We've got a new time clock system coming, and then a $10,000 increase in the animal control agreement with police, because they're charging us more now. Right, anything on any of those before we move on to kind of some of the bigger ticket items? All right, Jamie, do you want to cover the vehicles and?
I'd love to. All right, so for vehicles for fiscal year 2024, we're going to purchase 3 patrol replacement vehicles. We have 3 vehicles going from the police department to other departments, and that's what we call continued use, but in order to do that, you have to take off some decals and rearrange some stuff, so that's what that $39,000 is for. PW chipper and dump truck, fire ambulance will be purchased for fiscal year 2024, and fire tower ladder lease payment. This is an ongoing cost every year. We have a lease for 10 years, and the total amount of the lease is $2 million, and this is the annual payment for that. Fire pickup with plow and a fire SUV. Now, we do have some carryover on the next page. So we have already ordered these items, but they haven't come in yet, so we still have to pay for them, and it's 3 patrol replacements, a fire ambulance, and a fire SUV, and 2 public works pickup trucks. As far as the ambulances go, we have 3 ambulances. We have 2 frontline and 1 backline. The next purchase for the next ambulance is projected to be around 2028. The estimated life we have on ambulances right now is 9 years. And then the next, are there any questions on vehicles?
These Dodge cars now?
Well, there's a whole
Jeep.
mix now. We take kind of what we can get. And hopefully it shows up within a few years. The next slide.
Especially like fire vehicles that have to be built, you know, they're hopefully 2 years after you decide to purchase it. Something just showed up today, Chief, right? It's been away for over a year, you know, being refurbished, yeah.
Oh, the ambulance showed up? Oh, that's very good. We have a squad truck that just showed up for those on TV. Water structure, infrastructure items. So we have the North Water Tower, we put in an IEPA loan or we're putting in an IEPA loan application. It's going to come to the board next, on the 20th. We have a lot of stuff for the 20th. The plan is, the first year construction is $2.2 million, and the second year construction is $4 million. Planned to be completed at the end of 2025. Water main improvements, we have South Linden, North Warwick, East Des Moines, 41st and Lincoln Water Main Extension, and 55th Street Water Main Extension. So we have a lot planned for this coming year.
The South Linden, that's where the Holy Trinity is doing their parish, the park's doing their new building, and that's going to start soon. I'm looking at Amy back there, but that's already been awarded.
Awarded, and the notices went out either earlier this week or the end of last week, so I think earlier this week, so we'll be starting construction soon.
Good.
All right, and other water infrastructure items coming up. We did put aside $35,000 for Little Liberty Park just to submit for the IPA loan to continue that discussion. Hydrant replacement program. We have a valve replacement program and a water main replacement program. Water meter replacement program, sorry. We have plans to buy a dump truck and a meter car. That is not part of the vehicle reserve plan. This is out of the water fund, so it has to be separate. The water plant improvements is $230,000, and again, we have a water rate study that I'll be bringing to the Finance Administration Committee on the 20th. And we've already discussed that quite a bit, so we'll save the rest for the 20th.
Can someone refresh my memory on Liberty Park? Why are we going to submit if it was voted down? Is because just to continue planning and hope?
Yeah, so actually, I wanted to qualify that number. It doesn't cost us,
Okay.
it's to get the plans into a state of completeness to apply for the loan to do that. So it is still the best resource. By vote, it was a poll of the neighborhood by DuPage County cooperatively with us to do that, and they could not get 50% consensus in that thing. So all that meant is the county will not be proceeding with creating a special service area just based on that amount of information. They immediately notified everybody of that and instantly got feedback from the ones that do want it, and they're helping them prepare not a survey, a
Petition?
petition, thank you, to consider this again. So the county's still talking with the neighborhood. Why are we doing it? Because we will be the water utility that will serve it. So from the time we say go, it'll take 2 years to have, Chicago water coming out of their sinks. And so we're applying for this and get this and saying, we're just trying to cooperate. We look for a grant to do it as well. So this is just kind of the minimum investment on a $10 million project to be ready to move if we can.
What happens if we can't? What happens to the application for the loan? It just goes away?
Yeah, I think if you don't actually borrow the money, then hopefully it doesn't hurt your record, no, so.
You keep, if you want to let it die, you let it die. If you want to keep it on the table, you just keep moving out your application.
Ask for extensions and just keep.
Intended funding was, so.
Okay.
So I'm kind of okay with it just because their situation's not going to improve, It's going to decline and the costs are going to increase.
I think we realize that.
Right.
That gets back to my 2-year thing. If the longer, I understand the investment that they all have to make individually, and it is valuable, but when it becomes an emergency, it's going to be a regional, you'll be without water for 2 years, if it gets to that point, and then it's whether or not you can occupy the property. So I'm not sure it's fully understood the seriousness of the threat that exists today.
Steve, how much have we already appropriated expense-wise to assist in the engineering or the plans?
About this same amount already. Spencer made an expression that
I'm not
means
sure.
that it
I'd
was
have to
more
look.
than.
I thought it was more than 35,000 that we've paid them already, but.
But that was our
For the initial
commitment to
design.
assist.
We started that anyway. I mean, like, we will do it. So nothing that we've spent will be lost unless it's never done. So it will be done at some point. It'll need fine tuning, but a bigger point is the existing water customers of the Village of Westmont paying for this work for an area that, is not in Westmont and is not happening yet. So,
But it's a good neighborly thing to do.
yeah,
The right thing to do.
it's a tough one.
And we've also contacted Congressman Hassens
Yeah, so
and the
U.S.
county.
Representative, Congressman, there's a lot of people, DuPage County, there's a lot of assistance looking for funding. DuPage County's already allotted some,
Money.
and half the areas got a different situation than the other half, and they have to be treated differently, so there's just 10 parts, 2 big parts and, a bunch of other parts.
So the next slide. We have other infrastructure items, the long-awaited salt dome, the MFT resurfacing that we do annually, and gateway signs. So we also have a long list of capital projects that we've covered throughout this presentation, but the list is included in your packet at the end, and you can see what fund they're all coming out of. So it's a helpful little guide.
Can I just say that I don't know how the salt dome that we've got is still standing. There's, the things that are holding it up, the bars are rotten, they're gone, it's just like hanging. I don't know how don't know how it's still there.
Well, good thing we didn't have too much snow.
You're right.
Excellent team, maintenance professionals.
Too bad.
And I'm going to hand it back to Assistant Village Manager Parker.
It's the cuts.
All right, so talk through the trimming aspect of budget cuts.
Can I ask two?
Sure.
And I did not warn you that I was going to. So I have one comment and then a question. So and this is just for people listening, because this is a budget workshop for a budget that we have not adopted yet. But we've talked about 2 things, like the Linden Avenue water main, and there was something else that was going on that you've already awarded the work and we're starting the construction, but at the time you awarded it, you knew it was for to be appropriated here. So we're not spending any of that money until after May 1st when it was in there. So that's just why we're talking about things that are still in construction. And the question was, and don't, not a big question, but you did a good job of, before we went through that whole list, you had the priorities in the strategic plan versus the short-term priorities. And the strategic plan is of an age now, but when that was written, everything we do there's only 5 categories: governance, identity and image, downtown, economic development, and infrastructure. And then when we write the budget, not Spencer, finance, they tie everything back to the strategic plan so that that everything's being proposed is in there somewhere. But there was a lot of comment last month about how large the number was for identity and image, with the suggestion that we were spending, $1 billion on flowers. So what's in that category, and why was that identity and image such a large number?
Yeah, so the vast majority of that is the public safety items, because as part of the strategic plan in that section talking about identity and image, it talked about our identity as a safe place. And so with that, that's where it all kind of got squished.
So like all the policing and.
The police and the
Are
fire.
all in that category. It's
So of
not
the
ornament.
almost 19 million we're spending in the general fund, I think last we looked, it was roughly close to almost 17 million of that is specifically police and fire.
Thank you.
All right, so in terms of talking about budget cuts, the first section we want to talk through are the requests that came in that have already been trimmed. So, I think all of these are already good things that were put in there, but in order to get to the balanced budget and get to the place that we have, there was a few things that we needed to look at trimming, and so manager may had to kind of make that hard decision as to what kind of things to trim. So the items that have already been trimmed right now include $275,000 in personnel requests. One of the requests was to increase in employees' hours to the extent that it pushed them into the full-time category. And so what actually got approved in the budget was an increase in hours, but not to the extent of hitting full-time. So there's less expense because we don't have to pay for those full-time benefits. And then the other personnel request, which is the vast majority of this, is actually the item that we've already talked about, where there was a request to increase the staffing in the fire department to be able to staff the third ambulance a little bit more easily, be able to staff the ladder truck while the third ambulance is out. And understood the request, it was a good request, but in terms of, did it make sense to include it in the budget, or does it make sense to hold off until after the study? We felt it made sense to do a little bit more of it after the study, and therefore it was, when we had to cut to get to the balanced budget, that made sense that was the thing to hold off on for right now. There was also $35,000 reduction in the amount requested for the anniversary celebration in the fire. So it started out at $50,000. It's been cut currently to $15,000. And then there was also a $25,000 reduction in landscaping. So it was proposed at $45,000, cut down to $20,000. And then $10,000 requested to purchase a leaf vacuum, which did not make it into the budget. So not that any of these items are bad, but in order to get to the balanced budget, these are the ones that were trimmed. If we did want to look at saying we wanted to add this back in, then of course we'd have to say, okay, well then what are the other things we want to cut out? So that's an option. But I will say right now, we're at a balanced budget. Our general funds are such that we've got about $5,000 more coming in revenues than are going out in expenses. So
Spend that.
Give it to the fire department for their anniversary celebration.
give the $5,000 to the fire department.
I would be more curious to see, there goes my fireworks, but, I mean, it is their 100th anniversary, so I would be in favor of them getting a little extra, at least half of that, 30.
On that previous page, it says the anniversary celebration, 35,000, requested 50, it was cut to 15.
Yeah.
So they need 50 and it went to 15.
The request was, could they spend up to 50, and then it was dropped down to spending 15,000
Sorry.
for it.
Went to mayor, give them the 5.
Yeah, yeah,
Sounds good.
Better be a good party, though.
yeah.
To celebrate, we just had the 100th, and we know what we did, now they're having their 100th.
Got to do it.
They just gave it to you. Why are you speaking?
Because
He wants one more.
it needs to be brought. So, we're having a pancake breakfast the same day as the police is the shred event, and that's May 20th from 9 to noon at 500 North Cass. And that honestly is all the fire department is going to be having, because I've talked to Manager May, and, he put a thing in my head that is the right thing to do. It is not right for us to spend taxpayers' dollars on a party for a 100th celebration for the entire village. So I just want to bring that out. So I appreciate the funds, but that won't be doing, we do have coins and some memorabilia stuff, but we'll also be rededicating headquarters firehouse with a plaque for, Trustee Guzzo's father, who was a big part of that. And then there'll be some other little knickknacks, but that's all we truly need for the 100th.
You don't need to enhance the giveaways for your open house for the kids for the 100th?
Now, we have that all in the budget already for open house. That's all part
that's
of
not
it. We're
in the
going to
bid.
enhance that for October 14th, but we're not going to have the big picnic, water fight. Again, I can't spend money on water when we're talking about water rates and all that, and that'd be hundreds and thousands of gallons of water. and
You
it's
can't
just
pump
not the
that
right
out of
thing
a
to do.
lake? You can't pump that out of a lake?
Can't do that anymore either, man.
They used to do it at Twin Lakes, they had the,
I understand.
yeah,
So it'll be a virtual celebration.
yeah.
Yes, so.
That's a lot of
Appreciate the
pancakes for
thought, but I
15
really just
grand.
want to be upfront with the board that the pancake breakfast will be the only 100th anniversary function we have, and then we will enhance open house celebration on October 14th. So thank you.
Chief, what if you got donations?
So we do have some donations currently, but they're all from vendors that work through DuPage County Fire Chiefs and what I work with for the DuPage County Fire Chiefs golf outing. But the problem is we already had to book the venue, and then I've recused the venue, and I just feel very guilty of spending taxpayers' dollars to hold an event like that.
If you got money donations from,
I understand where you're coming from, I just don't know the cost of what that would be, so.
Okay.
And we were guesstimating the 50,000 with throwing the three functions together, plus if you recall, we had 10,000 in this current year's budget, and we've spent almost all that already, so. I appreciate the 5,000 extra dollars, I wish I could hold the mayor's fireworks, but I'll leave it at that.
I don't know what to do. No one's ever said no thank you before.
I'll take it.
Yeah, she's already lined it out.
It's crossed out.
Pancakes, maybe throwing some bacon, right?
Yeah, right.
There you go.
So if you want to find $35,000,
Yeah.
then they can return.
All right, so we're at a point where there's not a need to cut additional expenditures in order to hit the revenue goal, in order to hit their current revenues. If the board wants to start talking about some of that, we can, and we can kind of go through some stuff, but there's not a specific need to do that for this year. And our long-range plan, again, will end up with about 8 million. To the manager's point, that doesn't mean we're spending all the other pieces immediately, but we will have 8 million left. So if the board wanted to have more than 8 million left, we could talk about some one-time cuts. If the board wanted to get to where revenues exceeded expenses by more than 5,000, we could look at some additional cuts. So I don't know if we even want to go through them. I've got a few that we listed out here that were really just, what are the new things that we're doing or that we haven't fully done yet that we could start looking at, but none of these are things that we recommend cutting. If we had recommended them being cut, they would have already been cut. So is there any desire to go through and look at any of these, or if you prefer, we can just call it good, or we can go through and look at them, whatever you'd
Yeah,
like.
there was two purposes for that, just to let you know. I mean, there's 4 slides that cover this, that are in there, but if you wanted to return to something else that you saw was already cut, for example, if you wanted to reinsert something, then you could go to this list and trade it for something else. Would be one way to look at this.
The board's got the slides, you can take a
Other
look
than
at
that, these aren't recommendations, they're just,
And staff
We're
department,
prepared in case you wanted to go there.
they're all included.
these are balanced.
These are included?
These are included and balanced right now.
Yeah,
We're balanced.
the balance and the fund balance is good, so.
Yeah.
Is there any staffing needs?
So I will say the budget does include some increases in staffing, so there were some that were trimmed, but there were more staffing needs that have already kind of made it through the budget process to be included in there. Some for tweaks for some currents, but also a couple of specific new positions. So there's a couple of new positions in Public Works, one at the supervisory level, one at the facilities level to increase the number of people on our facilities team. And there's an increase for an administrative assistant as well.
And
So those items.
personnel are, and still a good point, but personnel is a recurring expense, so it's not just, these are all one-time things that you can trade that, so it would work for a year, but then you would have that expense, ongoing.
Those are, when you look at the cuts you did, they're minimal as far as the overall budget.
And, what does that speak to, the hard work that was done back in the corner there?
Or you scare the heck out of them so they don't
Just one.
want that.
So if there's anything anybody does want to cut beyond what we've talked about, we're welcome.
You probably should
Look
show
for that.
them just so that they
Yeah, so
appear.
we've identified some facilities improvements that are already included in the budget, but if somebody wanted to cut, this would be a place to cut, as well as some landscaping. Again, these are the ones that are already included in the budget. But if we had to cut and somebody said, no, we want to hit a different target besides that 8 million, these are some things that could be considered.
Is the fueling center
well.
landscape enhancement, is that to protect the homes a little bit? 'Cause when I was walking over there, and you could like see it bright, it's all fresh and vegetation stuff, but is that what that enhancement
Yeah.
means? Is to kind of block it from the residential?
Yeah,
stuff?
none of the landscape parts were done, and it's
Nice.
just a fence, and even the fence needed some
Those
attention.
neighbors will like that, okay.
Now, there was we listed landscape improvements in a previous slide, and that would have been, it's in there but reduced, that would be along the north frontage of the headquarters building. So that's different than.
Different
which-
spot.
Yeah.
I got it.
Is Addington Plaza improvements, are those in this year's budget? There's additional work to be done there.
I think that's just
Is there additional work?
stuff that's in the contract that they didn't get to before fall, and then some of it's just going to be, kind of got built into the West Quincy
What's in the last
plans, right.
Okay.
Not a lot, though, but I think one of them was irrigation, right?
Yeah.
We just,
Jim wants us
Talked
to
about-
clean it up a little bit,
Yeah,
put some plants in
yeah.
there.
But I do have to say, the reason why this is, feels like a streamline is that we cover a lot of this in committees through the year, so
Good
we
point.
know a lot of these major projects are gonna be done because they've been discussed, so, I know Mary,
I noticed there are several items in the budget, and then you were just discussing these landscape projects. As they're going through, is the village encouraging doing more natives and that, so the village doesn't
You better
have to
believe
spend
it.
money doing all these watering and everything in that?
Yes, for sure. That, we had a whole long meeting on that one.
There's a pretty good environmental improvement committee in town.
But they don't have approval on these landscaping.
no,
projects.
it's true, but they do make good recommendations, and we have a public works department, both, foresters, arborists, and landscape landscape, I don't know what it is.
Horticulturist?
Horticulturist, thank you, that all have input into these. Actually, they designed them.
Trustee Barker very much voices,
When I have a voice.
they have a voice, yeah.
The staff between John and Chad and those guys, we're in great hands. And we had a meeting of a month or so back, and Bob Fleck was there and talked about the care and the concern for all the environmental issues of pesticide spraying, which we get that question every month. Can you do this? Should you do this? Do you have to do it? And all the environmental concerns are being addressed. And that committee, Mary, that committee's great. They're just great people. And,
Not just native, but like the monarch attention and
yeah,
all that, too.
every aspect of it now, including the lighting and the recycling and all of that, and the RFP for the waste hauling. And then I just bring to the village board what they asked me to bring to the village board. And the village board listens. It's all in the paperwork.
You can see all that has been included in the budget.
It's outstanding.
All right, any other things?
Well done.
If not, then I will just note our grand totals. You can see the revenues and expenditures and the grand totals. And you can see the total expenditures less the transfer. Just wanted to at least kind of list those big final numbers. And then the action items that I've got identified, that Jamie and I have put together as we've gone through this, has been a comparison. So no changes to the actual budget itself. I think there was a $5,000 there for a minute till it got deleted again. But no changes to the budget itself, just future things for staff to put together at some point would be to look at the comparison of stormwater to initial plans from the Stormwater Committee and then confirm how much has been spent on Liberty Park I think in briefly looking at it, I think Steve May nailed it with being close to that 35,000 again, I believe. So I think we're in good shape with those items. Any other action items that we should add to this, or any other thoughts or anything before we end?
The only thing.
Otherwise, this is essentially what will be presented
Yeah.
next week.
We began with it, but even though you showed the previous slide that showed we're spending more than what we had in, the fund balances with the, going into the year is sufficient to cover that, and then there still will be a balance at the end of the year to give us 20% plus the long-range plan money.
Yep.
Right?
And, yeah, let me ask a question. It's a perfect time. So as long as Spencer sleeps good at night, because he's
I don't think he
conservative.
sleeps in
guarantee
any.
Anyway, we'll know if he's uncomfortable with it. But, so we have a potential at One North Cass. And then if something else would come along, we have the ability to say yes to that project as well, right?
Yes.
That's a contingency.
Yes, we have some contingency that we've got the ability to do that. We, put enough in the appropriations ordinance we can if we need to. But at the same time, we are also trying to be careful to not bite off more than we can chew and don't want to commit to new projects or new things that are going to have a huge, tremendous impact. But we still have enough in there that we can start working with people. If there's other good development projects that come along, we don't have to say, no, we can't do anything. And part of that is anything we start now probably isn't going to hit expenditures in this year's budget anyway, just because of timing, but we still have the ability to do that if needed. But we're
Perfect.
being cautious with
But
it.
not all projects require upfront money either. It could be require as to progress in the years. So
They used to call the fund, what's Steve gonna buy next?
yeah,
you know,
that's
so.
right. But the One North Cast, that dollar amount, where Mary questioned the 2.9, that includes all the major expenses that we would incur for any project there, I would imagine. There's not much more. Okay, good.
And to your point, a lot of future projects, a lot of the times we say, it all depends on what's going to come in the future, and it's more of a pay-as-you-go thing instead of upfront money. In this case, we're moving roads and doing some infrastructure pieces, so there's some upfront costs. But, like, for example, the 7 through 11, West Quincy,
Was close.
were all pay-as-you-go, and those are going great.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anybody else? Well done. Easy to follow, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, Little?
Second, Euro.
Motion made and seconded to adjourn the budget workshop. Roll call, please.
Mayor Gunther?
Here, yeah, I don't vote.
You still want to adjourn though, right?
You want to tie?
Yes.
So are you voting yes to adjourn?
Yes.
The clerk's adjourning. Trustee Barker?
Yes.
Brady? Trustee Brady? Trustee Guzzo?
Yes.
Trustee Little?
Yes.
Trustee Nero?
Yes.
Again, I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and this budget workshop
Hour and a
adjourned.
half budget workshop, wow.